Hi, it's John Kelly. In this module, we are going to discuss Section 720R, the annual report. It has a much longer title than that, but that's what it's about. And as always, we want to be efficient and effective, follow professional standards, and document what we have done properly. Now, this section has a much different definition of what an annual report is and what the auditor's responsibility is than before. And it's got a very broad definition in paragraph 12A of what an annual report is. And the other thing is it applies whether or not the annual report is included in the financial statements or separate. Some jurisdictions, the requirement was that if the annual report was separate, it did not include the financial statements, then the auditor didn't have to look at it. And that solved a bunch of problems. If the client wasn't entirely sure whether they were going to issue an annual report when you did the audit, as long as they didn't attach your financial statements, it wasn't a problem. The other thing is an annual report is no longer a document titled annual report. By definition, it can be any document, and any document prepared for owners or similar stakeholders with information about the year. So it could be anything. It could be an executive director's commentary. It could be all kinds of different documents that would qualify as the annual report and which the auditor has to be involved in and which the auditor has to potentially modify the audit report for. Now, it's probably the simplest if it's a listed company. It's probably automatic that they will issue an annual report. So you know it's going to happen and you can prepare for it and you can talk to management and make sure you get it on a timely basis. My question, I guess, is for a private company or for a not-for-profit, why are they being audited if there is not some user, some owner, some other stakeholder that's getting information about the year and the financial statements? And the definition of an annual report being very, very broad, that information that's being given to the owner or the other stakeholder will constitute an annual report, and the auditor will have to do something about the annual report and modify the opinion. Now, management's responsibility, management has to tell the auditor some stuff. So 13A, management has to tell the auditor what the annual report is and when it will be available. And listed company, that's probably automatic. As I said, for a private company and an NPO, if they're being audited, somebody's probably being reported to. It may take some time to figure that out. 13B, arrange to get the information, preferably before the audit report date. And again, in a listed company, you're probably going to insist on getting that before, so that's not a problem. For a private company or an NPO, it could be either before or after. And 13C says that if some or all of the information is not available before, then you get a written representation that management will provide it when it's ready. Listed company, that's probably not needed because you probably got it before. For a private company and an NPO, you're going to get such a representation. And regardless, you're going to want a written representation, both a representation and an engagement letter where the client agrees that should they issue anything that vaguely resembles an annual report, they will give it to you so that you can discharge your responsibilities. And then you will know whether or not you have to modify the audit opinion and the audit report. Now we come to the question of whether we always modify the audit report with respect to the annual report or, quote, other information. Now, if we have or expect to have all the information by the report date, it's the same in all three situations listed, private or NPO. You modify with respect to the annual report, and there's an illustration in 720, and it's number 1. Now, If you only expect to have some of the information by the report date, again, you will modify with respect to the annual report in all three circumstances, and illustrative example number 2 deals with listed, and private or NPO, there's illustrative example number 3. If you have none of the information by the report date for a listed company, and that would be rare. Actually, the second situation would also be rare in a listed company because I think normally you'd have it all by the report date. But there's an illustrative example, number 4. Now, I find the standard unclear. IFAC is of the opinion that for a private company or an NPO where none of the information is available at the report date, that no modification is needed. And that's in their basis for conclusion, paragraph 57. Certainly, it's going to be very important to get a representation from management that they're not going to do an annual report, or that if they are going to do an annual report, none of the information will be available at the report date. Now, I think there are several concerns with that. The first is there's a possible expectation gap that the person using the annual report, because they're going to see mention of it in just about every other audit report, is going to assume either that we forgot to do it or that we did it and it was okay and we didn't mention it. So my inclination is that we modify out of caution for both private and NPO, particularly if management says they won't issue but doesn't really understand the question we asked them, but some of the information does exist before, and accordingly we should have modified. The other thing I find is sometimes my clients tell me that they're never going to issue an annual report, but then they do, and the year later you might say, well, you know, you did it before and you said you weren't going to, but then you did, so out of caution I'm going to modify my audit report. Now, what do we have to do? We have to read for inconsistencies, compare selected information. We don't have to compare it all. We have to consider if the information is consistent. We have to remain alert. And IFAC says there's no single set of procedures to remain alert. You just remain alert. If there's a problem, you ask for it to be fixed, and presumably it will be. If it's not fixed, there's a long discussion in the section about what you might do about that. For listed companies, normally what you do is you withhold the audit report until you reviewed the annual report and concluded that it's okay, and approve both the annual report and the audit report at the same time. And that gives you some leverage to make sure that anything that you think is wrong is fixed. And normally management of a listed company wants very much to make sure that their annual report is correct. I've always found that when you suggest something be fixed, they're more than happy to do so. So management not fixing it would be, I think, an unusual situation. Other matters, you document what you have done and you keep a copy of the final version of the annual report. There are 7 examples. I've mentioned some of them already in the section. The opinion modification is complex. There are 7 different examples with different sets of wording. But generally what you do is you say that management is responsible for the annual report, and that implies that we are not. You describe the information and make it clear that the financial statements in the audit report are not part of the annual report because we have a different level of responsibility for those. Say very clearly that our opinion does not cover the annual report, and to make it really clear, now the third time that we have no responsibility, say that we provide no assurance on the annual report. Then it describes what we have done, says we've read the information looking for inconsistencies, says if we find a problem we're to report. I put that in quotes because what we will do will vary depending on the problem, and you need to read the section and find out if you have a problem, what to do. And then if there are no problems, says we have nothing to report. Now there's a risk to the auditor here, which I talked about before. If management issues an annual report or information that could constitute an annual report, either before or after, and we have made no mention of the report, we could be in trouble. Now, management tells the auditor, no, we haven't done it, and I would expect the most likely circumstance there is they just really don't understand what constitutes an annual report, and they've given some reporting to someone, a banker, for instance, and in retrospect, it constitutes an annual report, and it could have been prepared before, and they didn't tell us about it. Now, the standard, in my opinion, is not clear that for a private company or an NPO that no reporting is needed. I can come to that conclusion once I'm told that that was the intention, but if all I read is the standard, I don't see that. So I'm concerned that there will be an expectation gap of users of private company financial statements, for instance, a banker, and maybe we want to report anyway. So maybe this is what we do, and I have combined examples 3 and 4 to come up with my own version, which IFAC says isn't needed, but maybe it is. So I've just merged the two, and there's my thought as to what might be done. So thanks for listening.